Good evening. Tonight, we will go over one of the most unconventional chapters in the history of American intelligence, during which interesting conclusions were made on how the human mind works. The partially declassified Stargate program scientifically demonstrated that human consciousness can transcend space and time, which also meant that reality is some kind of a hologram. Get comfortable, and let me tell you everything. Chapter 1. The Cold War Context and the Psychic Gap. The history of sustained investigation by the United States government into psychic phenomena is linked to the geopolitical climate of the Cold War. It was not an initiative born from a sudden surge of interest in the paranormal within the intelligence community. Actually, it was a defensive reaction based on a specific, tangible concern: the possibility that the Soviet Union was achieving a breakthrough in an entirely new and potentially invisible form of warfare. To understand the origins of the program that would eventually be known as Stargate, we must first look at the intelligence landscape of the early 1970s. During this period, U.S. intelligence agencies began to receive a series of unsettling reports regarding the scope and scale of Soviet research into parapsychology. The implications of these reports were profound. If the human mind could be utilized to gather intelligence from a distance, without the need for physical intrusion or technical surveillance, it would represent a strategic advantage of unparalleled magnitude. The terminology used by the Soviets for this field of study was often deliberately opaque, designed perhaps to frame the research in more scientific, less mystical terms. They spoke of psychotronics. This field encompassed a broad range of paranormal phenomena. It included investigations into extrasensory perception, ESP, the study of telepathy, the direct transmission of thought from one mind to another, and psychokinesis, the theoretical ability to influence physical objects using only the power of the mind. Other terms frequently encountered in the intelligence reports included biocommunications, psychoenergetics, and the study of biophysical effects. This nomenclature served to legitimize the research within the materialistic framework of Soviet science. The financial commitment reportedly allocated to these efforts was significant. By 1970, intelligence sources estimated that the Soviet Union was spending approximately 60 million rubles annually on psychotronic research. By 1975, this figure was believed to have risen dramatically, perhaps exceeding 300 million rubles annually. This level of investment suggested a high-priority, state-sponsored program, not merely the esoteric interests of a few marginalized scientists. This intelligence created a palpable anxiety within the U.S. defense establishment. A concept began to circulate, known informally as the psychic gap. This term was analogous to the earlier very real fears of a missile gap, or a bomber gap, that had driven the nuclear arms race. The central apprehension was that if the Soviets succeeded in weaponizing these abilities, they could gain a decisive and undetectable strategic advantage. The ability to read sensitive documents from afar, to locate submarines deep beneath the ocean surface, or even to influence the decision-making processes of key leaders, represented a threat vector for which the United States had no defense. A detailed assessment of this perceived threat was formalized in a 1975 U.S. Army intelligence report. The document carried the title, Soviet and Czechoslovakian Parapsychology Research. This report provided a comprehensive overview of the Eastern Bloc's programs, outlining their scope, key research centers, and the specific terminology employed. It served as a crucial document in justifying the need for a corresponding American effort. However, it is important to note that the intelligence picture was far from clear. Declassified documents from the period reveal a deeply contradictory view of the Soviet program. While some reports, like the 1975 Army assessment, pointed to a massive coordinated effort involving more than 30 research centers across the Soviet Union, other sources painted a very different picture. Some Soviet scientists, when questioned by their Western counterparts, dismissed the work as being conducted by amateurs without official recognition or significant funding. Furthermore, the field of parapsychology, was occasionally subject to public attack within the Soviet Union itself. Articles appeared in state-controlled media outlets, such as Pravda, the official newspaper of the Communist Party, denouncing psychic research as pseudoscience or bourgeois mysticism. This contradiction suggests a complex reality. It is entirely plausible that the Soviet Union was conducting highly classified research while simultaneously engaging in a sophisticated campaign of public denial and disinformation. Such a strategy would serve multiple purposes. It could obscure their true progress from adversaries, protect sensitive research from exposure, and foster confusion and skepticism within the Western intelligence community. This ambiguity placed American intelligence agencies in a difficult strategic position. They were faced with a phenomenon that challenged the foundational principles of Western science, yet seemed to be embraced by their primary adversary. The decision to initiate an American program was not predicated on a certainty that psychic phenomena were real. It was based on a calculated risk assessment. The strategic calculation was straightforward. The United States could not afford for psychic espionage to be real, and for the Soviets to master it first. The program was thus initiated as a defensive measure. It was an exploration of a controversial and unconventional field, driven by the high stakes of Cold War paranoia. The US began its own program not necessarily because the intelligence leadership believed in the reality of psychic spies, but because they believed the Soviets did. This foundational premise, that the program was a response to a perceived threat, rather than an independent scientific inquiry, would shape its evolution, its funding, and its ultimate fate over the next 2 decades. Chapter 2: The Bureaucratic Mess and the Secret Scientists. The United States government's remote viewing program had no clear mandate or consistent oversight. Instead, it was a succession of projects, a patchwork of initiatives that shifted frequently between different controlling agencies, geographic locations, and classified code names. This constant bureaucratic movement is revealing. It reflects the program's often tenuous status within the intelligence community. It highlights an ongoing struggle for sustained funding, the shifting priorities of its sponsors, and the internal debates regarding its efficacy. The trajectory of the program moved from purely exploratory research toward the development of operational intelligence gathering capabilities. The journey spanned 25 years, beginning in 1970 and concluding in 1995. Throughout this period, the program operated under a veil of intense secrecy, known only to a small number of individuals within the intelligence and defense establishments. The initial research was funded by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, beginning in 1970. The CIA, tasked with anticipating and neutralizing foreign threats, was the logical starting point for investigating the potential of psychic espionage. The actual experiments commenced in 1972 at a civilian research facility, the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, in Menlo Park, California. This first phase of the program operated under the codename SCANET. This designation was an acronym, standing for Scan by Coordinate. The focus during the SCANET years, approximately 1970 to 1977, was primarily experimental. The researchers at SRI were tasked with determining if the phenomenon of remote viewing, the ability to perceive distant locations using only the mind, was real, and if so, whether it could be harnessed for intelligence purposes. As the program demonstrated potential, and as the results from the SRI experiments began to accumulate, interest grew within military intelligence circles. The potential for a new form of intelligence gathering was too significant to remain solely within the purview of the CIA's research and development branch. In 1977, the program underwent its first major transition. It was transferred to the U.S. Army, specifically under the oversight of the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence. This marked a significant shift, not only in administrative control, but also in location and focus. The program moved from the academic environment of SRI to the operational environment of Fort Meade, Maryland, the headquarters of the National Security Agency and a central hub for military intelligence. This new phase was designated Gondola Wish. Active from 1977 to 1978, Gondola Wish represented the Army's initial attempt to integrate remote viewing into its operational intelligence framework. The goal was to move beyond the laboratory and determine the practical utility of the phenomenon in real-world scenarios. The program continued to evolve rapidly. In 1978, oversight shifted again, this time involving a joint effort between the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Army's Intelligence and Security Command, INSCOM. The code name was changed to Grill Flame. This phase, lasting from 1978 to 1983, saw the establishment of a dedicated remote viewing unit at Fort Meade. While the operational unit was now active in Maryland, research continued concurrently at SRI, creating a dual-track approach that combined scientific investigation with practical application. Grill Flame was a period of significant activity. The unit at Fort Meade was tasked with a wide range of intelligence targets, from locating downed aircraft to monitoring Soviet military developments. The relationship between the researchers at SRI and the operational viewers at Fort Meade was symbiotic. The Research Institute developed the protocols and methodologies, while the Fort Meade unit tested them in the field. In 1983, the program underwent another reorganization. It remained under the control of the Army's INSCOM, but the code name was changed to Center Lane. This phase, active from 1983 to 1985, continued the dual-track approach, with activities at both Fort Meade and SRI. The focus during this period was on refining the training methodologies and improving the consistency and accuracy of the remote viewers. A major shift occurred in 1985. The Defense Intelligence assumed primary control of the program, specifically under the Directorate for Science and Technology. The code name was changed once more, this time to Sunstreak. This phase, lasting from 1985 to 1991, marked a consolidation of the program's activities. The operational unit remained at Fort Meade, but the research component began to transition away from SRI. The final phase of the program began in 1991. It remained under the primary control of the Defense Intelligence Agency, but the codename was changed to Stargate. This is the designation under which the program would ultimately be declassified and become known to the public. During this period, the research component previously conducted at SRI was moved to Science Applications International Corporation, or SAIC. The Stargate phase lasted until 1995. In its closing months, in 1995, the program was transferred back to the CIA. This transfer was not for the purpose of rejuvenation, but for a terminal evaluation. The Cold War had ended. The Soviet threat that had justified the program's existence had dissolved, and the intelligence community was re-evaluating its priorities. This bureaucratic odyssey from ScanIt to Stargate, from the CIA to the Army to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and back to the CIA, and from SRI to Fort Meade. This governance mess clearly illustrates the inherent tension surrounding the program. It was sustained by a combination of intriguing results and high-level patronage, yet it always existed on the periphery, struggling for legitimacy within a system that was inherently skeptical of its foundational premise. What is baffling is the narrow scope of us humans, who may have been on the verge of learning how our consciousness can transcend time and space. And yet, we only look at it as a weapon that may or may not be worth it. The constant shifting of administrative homes was a symptom of that shallow struggle, a reflection of the ongoing debate over the reality and utility of psychic espionage. The formal beginning of the US government's experiments on remote viewing can be traced to that unique partnership formed between the Central Intelligence Agency and two physicists at the Stanford Research Institute that you now know, which, by the way, was a prestigious non-profit research organization with a long history of conducting classified work for the US government. It was within this environment, characterized by scientific rigor and a focus on technological innovation, that the initial experiments in psychic phenomena took place. The two individuals at the center of this partnership were Dr. Harold Puthoff and Russell Targ. Both were accomplished physicists with backgrounds in laser development and quantum electronics. Their involvement gave this new program a degree of scientific credibility that was crucial for securing funding and support within the skeptical bureaucracy of the intelligence community. Puthoff and Targ had become aware of the reports concerning Soviet research into parapsychology. Motivated by a combination of scientific curiosity and a recognition of the potential strategic implications, they initiated their own preliminary studies into the field. They were not approaching the subject from a mystical or occult perspective, but rather as an unexplored area of human perceptual capability that might be understood through the application of scientific methodology. Their work captured the interest of the CIA, which, as we have noted, was actively seeking to understand the potential threat posed by Soviet advances in psychotronics. The CIA was looking for a scientific partner capable of conducting a rigorous investigation into the validity of these claims. Puthoff and Targ, with their credentials and their location at a trusted research facility, were ideally positioned to fill this role. Having found the right people for the job, that's when the CIA initiated funding for the first program. This marked the formal commencement of the government's 2-decade investigation. The initial project, as mentioned previously, was codenamed SCANIT, Scan by Coordinate. This name reflected the methodology that would become a crucial aspect of the program, the use of geographic coordinates to direct the attention of the remote viewers to specific targets, thereby eliminating the possibility of conscious or subconscious cueing. While a specific verbatim authorization memorandum from the CIA to Puthoff detailing the initial scope of work has not been publicly declassified, numerous subsequent documents confirm this foundational link. The relationship was established quietly under the umbrella of the CIA's technical services divisions, which were responsible for developing new technologies for intelligence gathering. The initial experiments conducted under the SCANIT project were designed to test the fundamental premise of remote viewing. Could an individual, isolated in a secure room, accurately describe a distant location that they had no normal means of perceiving? The protocols developed for these experiments were rigorous, designed to eliminate alternative explanations such as sensory leakage, fraud, or coincidence. We will examine these protocols in greater detail later in our discussion. The results of these early experiments were deemed successful enough to warrant continued and expanded funding. The data generated provided the empirical foundation upon which the entire program was built. It was the apparent success of the project that led to the involvement of the Department of Defense and the eventual establishment of the operational units at Fort Meade. The partnership between the intelligence community and the physicists was therefore central to the history of the Stargate program. It was a collaboration that bridged the gap between the structured world of classified intelligence and the uncharted territory of human consciousness. Puthoff and Targ were the scientific architects of the program, providing the theoretical framework and the methodological rigor that allowed it to survive and expand within the demanding environment of the U.S. government. This partnership also placed the researchers in a unique and challenging position. They were operating at the intersection of hard science and anomalous phenomena, exploring a field that was largely regarded as pseudoscience by the mainstream academic community. Their willingness to engage with this controversial subject matter within the context of a classified government program and set the stage for the complex history that followed. The scientific leadership of the remote viewing program was composed of individuals with impeccable academic and professional credentials. This is a crucial point to emphasize. The program needed what we call credentialed scientists, primarily physicists with backgrounds in areas such as quantum electronics, laser development, and experimental nuclear physics. Their involvement was essential for the program's survival. It provided a scientific legitimacy that was necessary for the research to proceed within the skeptical and often hostile bureaucracy of the U.S. government. However, this involvement placed these scientists in a precarious professional position. They found themselves caught in what might be termed a credibility paradox. The very credentials that made the program possible within the classified world simultaneously alienated them from the mainstream scientific community. They were respected enough by the intelligence community to be entrusted with a top-secret program, yet their research was considered too unorthodox, too far outside the accepted boundaries of science, to be fully embraced by their academic peers. This tension defined their careers and the legacy of their work. Now, before we continue, let us examine the profiles of the three principal scientists who guided the program through its various stages. The primary scientific architect of the remote viewing program was Dr. Harold Puthoff. Born in 1936, Puthoff is a theoretical and experimental physicist. He earned his PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University in 1967. His early career included significant work within the intelligence community, including time spent at the National Security Agency and the Naval Security Group. This background provided him with the necessary clearances and understanding of the intelligence landscape. Dr. Puthoff's scientific credentials were well established prior to his involvement in parapsychology. He wrote a graduate-level textbook titled Fundamentals of Quantum Electronics and holds several patents in the fields of lasers and communications technology. His expertise in these areas informed his approach to the study of psychic phenomena, which he viewed not as supernatural events, but as potential manifestations of physical processes that were not yet fully understood. It is noted in the record that Puthoff's interest in parapsychology was reportedly influenced by his involvement with Scientology in the late 1960s and early 1970s. During this period, he claimed to have experienced a form of remote viewing, then termed exteriorization within that framework. This personal experience may have provided the initial impetus for his subsequent scientific investigation. As the co-founder and the first director of the program, Puthoff was the individual who initially brought the concept of remote viewing, framed as a scientifically testable hypothesis, to the attention of the CIA. Working alongside Puthoff was Russell Targ. Targ was also a physicist and a recognized pioneer in the development of lasers and laser applications. His professional achievements included receiving 2 awards from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration for his inventions and contributions to the field. Targ held a bachelor's degree in physics from Queens College and pursued graduate work at Columbia University. In 1972, when he co-founded the psychic research program with Hal Puthoff, Targ was instrumental in designing the rigorous experimental protocols. He emphasized the need for double-blind conditions and statistical analysis to ensure the validity of their findings. It is also Targ who credits one of the early viewers, Ingo Swann, with coining the term remote viewing. In 1971, this term was chosen deliberately to distinguish their scientific approach from the more general and often vaguely defined concept of clairvoyance. It provided a neutral, descriptive label for the phenomenon they were investigating. Later in the program's history, another key scientific figure emerged. Dr. Edwin May joined the remote viewing program in 1975. Dr. May was an experimental nuclear physicist by training. He brought a different set of skills and perspectives to the research effort. He served as the director of research for the program's final decade, from 1985 to 1995. In this capacity, he oversaw the research conducted. Dr. May became the program's most ardent scientific defender. He focused on refining the experimental methodologies and analyzing the statistical significance of the results. During his tenure, he produced over 100 scientific publications related to the topic of remote viewing. After the program was terminated in 1995, Dr. May dedicated significant effort to preserving the historical record. He co-edited the 4-volume Stargate Archives, a comprehensive collection of the program's declassified research papers. These 3 individuals, Puthoff, Targ, and May, formed the scientific core of the program. Their commitment to applying the scientific method to the study of anomalous phenomena provided the foundation for the government's sustained involvement. They operated at the intersection of classified intelligence and frontier science, navigating the complex demands of both worlds. Chapter 3: Instruments of Perception. At the heart of the remote viewing program was a small group of individuals who demonstrated a consistent and often startling ability to acquire information about distant and unseen targets. These were the viewers, the instruments of perception. They came from diverse backgrounds, the arts, law enforcement, and the military. They were not a homogeneous group. Each brought a unique style, methodology, and understanding to the act of remote viewing. The success of the program depended entirely on their ability to access information through means other than the known senses. Perhaps the most influential figure among the early viewers was Ingo Swann, an artist and writer. Swann was born in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado and lived from 1933 to 2013. He is widely regarded not just as a participant, but as a co-creator of the remote viewing program alongside Puthoff and Targ. His contributions extended beyond simply performing as a viewer. He was central to the development of the program's protocols and the theoretical understanding of the underlying mechanisms of psychic functioning. Swann reported having paranormal experiences from a very young age. He described an out-of-body experience occurring during a surgery to remove his tonsils at the age of 3. He also claimed the ability to perceive auras, which he described visually as butterfly lights surrounding living things. These experiences informed his understanding of human consciousness as something not strictly confined to the physical body. When Swann began working with Puthoff and Targ at SRI, he brought a sophisticated understanding of his own internal processes. He was instrumental in helping the researchers understand the subjective experience of remote viewing, which was crucial for designing effective experiments. Swann theorized that the ability to remote view stemmed from a specific faculty of the mind, which he termed the ESP core. He postulated that thanks to it, he could perceive information directly, without the interference of the conscious, analytical mind. Swann observed that the raw perceptual data, the initial impressions of shapes, colors, and textures, was often accurate. However, when the conscious mind attempted to interpret this raw data, to label it or make sense of it, errors were introduced. He called this process analytical overlay. The development of the remote viewing protocols, particularly the structured approach known as coordinate remote viewing, was heavily influenced by Swann's insights. The goal was to train viewers to bypass the analytical filters and verbalization processes of the conscious ego, allowing the raw data to emerge uncontaminated. Swann described the process as accessing a deeper self that operated with its own logic, independent of the conscious mind's expectations. He recounted a realization that came to him during an early experiment at SRI. In this experiment, he was attempting to perceive target symbols. He correctly sketched the shapes of the symbols, but his conscious mind had perceived them as being upside down. This discrepancy highlighted the distinction between the raw perception and the subsequent interpretation. Ingo Swann's role was foundational. He provided the researchers with a working model of psychic functioning and a methodology for training others to access these abilities. His influence permeated the program throughout its history, long after his direct participation had ended. While Ingo Swann was instrumental in developing the structured methodology of remote viewing, another early viewer demonstrated a raw, intuitive talent that produced some of the most compelling evidence in the program's history. This individual was Pat Price. Price was a retired police commissioner from Burbank, California. He passed away in 1975, only a few years after his involvement with the program began. During his career in law enforcement, Price was known for what his colleagues described as an uncanny ability to solve crimes. He possessed an intuitive sense of where to find evidence or how a crime had been committed, often leading to breakthroughs in difficult cases. In 1973, Price approached the researchers independently. He had heard about their work and stated that he had been utilizing similar psychic abilities for years in his police work. He offered his services to the program, believing that his skills could be useful for national security purposes. Price's approach to remote viewing was distinctly different from Swann's methodical, structured approach. Price was renowned for his raw accuracy. He would often provide stunningly specific details about a target site, seemingly without effort or conscious analysis. He did not attempt to filter his perceptions or adhere strictly to protocols. He simply described what he saw. Russell Targ described Price as a completely integrated psychic person. He suggested that Price possessed a continuous psychic awareness of the world around him, rather than an ability that needed to be activated or accessed through a specific procedure. This natural, continuous access allowed him to perceive details that other viewers often missed. One famous incident illustrates the specificity of Price's abilities and the challenges it posed for the intelligence community. In a session targeting a secret national security agency facility, Price was given only the general location. He proceeded to describe the physical layout of the facility in remarkable detail. But he went further. He reportedly provided the correct code names for classified projects being conducted at the site. Even more astonishingly, he described the labels written on file folders locked inside secure cabinets within the facility. The accuracy of this information sparked a frantic internal investigation within the NSA. The assumption was that there must have been a security leak. A mole hunt was initiated to identify the source of the information. The investigation, however, proved fruitless. No evidence of a conventional security breach was found. The only remaining explanation, however unconventional, was that Price had indeed perceived the information through remote viewing. Price's involvement with the program was brief but impactful. His sudden death from a heart attack in 1975 cut short his participation. Suspicious. Given the sensitive nature of his work and the accuracy of his perceptions regarding classified facilities, his death remains a subject of speculation among some researchers in the field. Though, of course, no evidence of foul play has ever been substantiated. Pat Price demonstrated the potential of remote viewing in its rawest form, providing data points so specific that they challenged the very foundations of conventional intelligence gathering. As the remote viewing program transitioned from the research phase to the operational environment of Fort Meade, the focus shifted to developing a group of military personnel trained in these techniques. The goal was to create a unit capable of providing actionable intelligence on demand. Among the first recruits to this secret military psychic unit was Joseph McMoneagle. McMoneagle was a highly decorated U.S. Army non-commissioned officer and chief warrant officer. He was recruited into the program in 1978, during the grill flame phase. His background was in conventional military intelligence, providing him with an understanding of the requirements and protocols of intelligence collection. McMoneagle's psychic abilities reportedly emerged and intensified following a profound near-death experience in 1970. While serving overseas. This experience, he later recounted, fundamentally altered his perception of reality and opened him up to information accessed through non-standard means. When the Army began actively seeking candidates for the new remote viewing unit, McMoneagle volunteered. He underwent a series of rigorous screening tests designed to evaluate his potential abilities. He performed exceptionally well, demonstrating a high degree of accuracy in controlled experiments. As the program matured, McMoneagle became the primary operational remote viewer for U.S. Army intelligence. He was designated as Viewer 001, signifying his status as the first official viewer in the military unit. He worked on some of the program's most sensitive and critical targets until his retirement from the Army in 1984. Though he continued to work with the program as a civilian consultant afterward. McMoneagle's operational record is extensive. His missions included a wide range of intelligence objectives. He was tasked with locating Soviet submarines, identifying terrorist hideouts, tracking the movements of drug smugglers, and providing descriptions of secret weapons development facilities. He operated under strict protocols, often given nothing more than a set of coordinates or a sealed envelope containing the target designation. His approach to remote viewing was characterized by a meticulous attention to detail and a strong emphasis on objective reporting. He focused on providing verifiable data shapes, dimensions, colors, and configurations, while minimizing analytical overlay or subjective interpretation. His military training instilled in him a discipline that was well suited to the demands of operational intelligence gathering. Beyond Swan, Price, and McMoneagle, the program utilized a number of other talented individuals throughout its history. The unit at Fort Meade included personnel recruited from various branches of the military, selected for their intuitive abilities and their capacity to work within a structured, classified environment. Notable among them was Leonard Buchanan, a retired Army Sergeant First Class. Buchanan served as a trainer for the U.S. Army's Remote Viewing Unit at Fort Meade from 1984 to 1992. He was trained in the coordinate remote viewing methodology developed by Ingo Swann and was responsible for training new recruits and managing operational sessions. Another notable viewer was David Morehouse, a decorated Army officer. Morehouse was recruited into the program after a near-fatal training accident in 1987. During the accident, a stray bullet struck his helmet, resulting in a head injury and reportedly the emergence of psychic abilities. He later detailed his experiences in the unit in the best-selling book Psychic Warrior. The viewers were the human element of the Stargate project. Their unique abilities, honed through training and practice, provided the data that fueled the program for over 2 decades. They operated in a realm where the boundaries of human perception were constantly being tested and expanded, contributing to a complex and enduring archive of anomalous perception. Chapter 4: A Science for Seeing. For the remote viewing program to maintain credibility within the intelligence community, it needed to demonstrate that the results obtained were not due to conventional explanations. The researchers were acutely aware of the skepticism surrounding parapsychological research. From the outset, they sought to apply the principles of the scientific method to their investigation of psychic phenomena. They developed a set of strict, repeatable protocols designed to eliminate alternative explanations, such as sensory cueing, fraud, or coincidence. The primary challenge in designing a remote viewing experiment is ensuring that the viewer cannot obtain information about the target through any known sensory channels. This requires meticulous attention to the experimental design and the implementation of controls to prevent what is termed sensory leakage. Sensory leakage could occur if the viewer overhears a conversation about the target, sees a document related to the target, or receives subtle cues from the researchers. The development of these protocols was an iterative process. The researchers continually refined their methodologies based on the results of the experiments and the feedback from the viewers. They sought to create a standardized procedure that could be replicated by other researchers, a key requirement of the scientific method. The foundational principle underlying the protocols was the concept of the double-blind experiment. In standard scientific research, a double-blind condition means that neither the subject, in this case, the viewer, nor the experimenter interacting with the subject, the interviewer or monitor, knows the specifics of the trial. This is crucial for preventing the experimenter from inadvertently influencing the subject's responses. In the context of remote viewing, the double-blind protocol ensured that the remote viewer had no prior knowledge of the target location. But equally important, the monitor sitting with the viewer during the session was also kept blind to the target. If the monitor knew the target was, for example, a large suspension bridge, they might unconsciously tense up when the viewer started describing a desert landscape, or subtly encourage the viewer when they mentioned water or metal structures. The double-blind condition eliminated this potential source of error, ensuring that any accurate information provided by the viewer could not be attributed to experimenter cueing. The implementation of these protocols required a secure environment. The experiments were typically conducted in a dedicated laboratory, a secure, windowless room, often electromagnetically shielded to minimize external interference. The viewer and the monitor would be isolated in this room for the duration of the session. The selection of targets was also subject to rigorous controls, to ensure that the results were not due to the selective reporting of successful sessions. The targets needed to be chosen randomly from a large pool of potential sites. This randomization process prevented the researchers from consciously or unconsciously selecting targets that were easier to view or that matched the known proclivities of the viewer. The emphasis on rigor and transparency at least within the classified environment where the research was conducted, was essential for the program's longevity and its ability to withstand scrutiny. The researchers developed several distinct methodologies for conducting remote viewing experiments. The most foundational experimental design used in the early years of the program, primarily for local targets, was the outbounder protocol. It was designed to test the ability of a viewer to perceive the location of a distant individual in real time. The procedure involved several carefully orchestrated steps to ensure the integrity of the experiment. First, the remote viewer and the monitor were sequestered in the secure laboratory room. They remained in this isolated environment throughout the duration of the experiment. Second, a separate team, known as the outbounder team, would receive instructions for the target location. The target was randomly selected from a pre-compiled list of sites in the San Francisco Bay Area. The selection process was conducted independently, ensuring that neither the viewer nor the monitor had any knowledge of the chosen location. Third, the outbounder team would travel to the target site. At a prearranged time, synchronized with the start of the session, the outbounder team would simply observe their surroundings for a specified duration, typically 15 to 30 minutes. They served as a beacon, focusing their attention on the details of the location. Simultaneously, back in the laboratory, the viewer would be asked to focus their attention on the location of the outbounder team. The viewer would then record their impressions, both verbal descriptions and sketches, of where they perceived the outbounders to be. The monitor, being blind to the target, would ask neutral questions to elicit more detail, careful not to lead the viewer or suggest specific interpretations. The outbounder protocol provided a robust framework for testing the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon. The physical separation between the viewer and the target, combined with the double-blind conditions, effectively eliminated the possibility of sensory cueing. Once the session was complete, the data generated by the viewer, the transcript of the verbal descriptions and the drawings, needed to be evaluated objectively. This led to the development of a rigorous judging and analysis protocol. The subjective nature of the remote viewing data required a method for quantifying its accuracy. To evaluate the results, the transcripts and drawings from multiple sessions involving different targets were randomized. An independent judge, who had not been involved in the experiments and had no knowledge of which session corresponded to which target, would then visit all the possible target locations. The judge would systematically compare each transcript and drawing to each site, rank ordering how well the data matched the actual location. For example, if 5 sessions were conducted, targeting 5 different locations, the judge would rank the 5 transcripts against each target. If the remote viewing was successful, the correct transcript should consistently rank higher than the incorrect transcripts. This blind matching process allowed for statistical analysis to determine if the viewer's accuracy exceeded what would be expected by chance. The results of these analyses consistently showed statistically significant effects, providing compelling evidence for the reality of the phenomenon. While the outbounder protocol was effective for research purposes, it was not practical for operational intelligence gathering. Intelligence targets were often located thousands of miles away, and it was not feasible to send an outbounder team to the site. This necessity led to the development of the scan-by-coordinate method, later formalized as coordinate remote viewing or CRV. In this methodology, the viewer was given nothing more than the geographic latitude and longitude of the target location. This approach was intended to provide a pure target identifier, stripped of any descriptive language or contextual information that could consciously or subconsciously influence the viewer's perception. The coordinates themselves are arbitrary map references, carrying no inherent information about the nature of the site. The CRV methodology, developed primarily by Ingo Swann, involved a structured, multi-stage process designed to access the raw perceptual data while minimizing analytical overlay. The viewer would progress through a series of stages, starting with basic sensory impressions, colors, shapes, textures, and gradually moving to more complex concepts and detailed descriptions. The development of these rigorous protocols, the outbounder method and CRV, represented a significant achievement. They provided a standardized framework for investigating the phenomenon of remote viewing, moving it from the realm of anecdote to the domain of experimental science. Chapter 5: Mind Travel to Jupiter and a Soviet Secret. The core of the Stargate project archives consists of thousands of pages of session transcripts. These documents provide a detailed record of the focused attempts by remote viewers to perceive and describe targets, hidden by distance, shielding, or even time. The data ranges from the mundane to the extraordinary, reflecting the inherent variability of the remote viewing process. We will now examine some of the most significant and well-documented sessions in the program's history, reviewing the verbatim transcripts and the subsequent analysis. One of the earliest and most intriguing sessions occurred on the 27th of April, 1973. The viewer was Ingo Swann, working at the Stanford Research Institute. The target was the planet Jupiter. This session stands as a landmark in the program's history for a specific reason. At the time the session was conducted, very little was known about the detailed atmospheric and surface conditions of Jupiter. NASA's Pioneer 10 spacecraft was scheduled to make its historic flyby of the planet approximately 9 months later, in December 1973. Therefore, the session produced data on a target that was, at the time, scientifically unknown and verifiable only by future exploration. This eliminated the possibility of the viewer having prior knowledge of the target details. The session was conducted under controlled conditions. Swann was asked to focus his attention on the planet Jupiter and describe his perceptions. We will now review excerpts from the verbatim transcript of the session, titled Swann, Sherman Jupiter Touchdown Probe, the 27th of April, 1973. The times indicated are the elapsed time from the start of the session. At 6:03, Swann begins, "There is a planet with stripes." At 6:04, "I hope it is Jupiter." At 6:06, he provides a hypothesis about the planet's composition. "I think that it must have an extremely large hydrogen mantle." At 6:08, Swann describes the atmosphere, providing the most crucial data point of the session. "Very high in the atmosphere, there are crystals. They glitter. Maybe the stripes are like bands of crystals, maybe like rings of Saturn, though not far out like that, very close within the atmosphere. I bet you they'll reflect radio probes." Is that possible if you had a cloud of crystals that were assaulted by different radio waves? This description of bands of crystals resembling rings of Saturn, but located close to the planet, was entirely novel. At 6:10, Swann describes moving deeper into the atmosphere. "Now, I'll go down through. It feels really good there, inside those cloud layers, those crystal layers. They look beautiful from the outside. From the inside, they look like roiling gas clouds, eerie yellow light rainbows. I get the impression, though I don't see, that it is liquid." At 6:10, he perceives what he interprets as the surface. "Then I came through the cloud cover, the surface. It looks like sand dunes, tremendous winds." At 6:14, "I feel that there is liquid somewhere. Those mountains are very huge, but they still don't poke up through the crystal cloud cover." At 6:18, "I see something that looks like a tornado. I bet you that the surface of Jupiter will give a very high infrared count. The heat is held down." At 6:23, the session concludes. "I am back." The analysis and confirmation of this session occurred over several years. Swann's description included several accurate elements, such as the extensive hydrogen mantle and the presence of high winds and atmospheric turbulence. However, his most notable perception was the mention of a ring system around Jupiter. In 1973, the existence of rings around Jupiter was unknown to astronomy. Saturn was the only planet known to possess a ring system. It was not until 6 years later, in 1979, that the Voyager 1 probe, during its flyby of Jupiter, photographed the planet's faint, dusty rings. These rings are indeed composed of small particles, or crystals, as Swann described them, and are located much closer to the planet than the rings of Saturn. For the program's proponents, the Jupiter session represented a stunning success. It was considered a pure experiment, where the result was not only accurate but predictive. The data was untainted by any possibility of prior knowledge. sensory leakage, or analytical overlay based on existing information. It suggested that the remote viewing capability could access information not available through any other means, making it a potentially invaluable tool for scientific exploration, as well as intelligence gathering. While the Jupiter session demonstrated the potential of remote viewing in a purely scientific context, the primary objective of the program was the collection of operational intelligence. One of the most famous examples of this application occurred in July 1974. The viewer was Pat Price, the retired police commissioner known for his raw accuracy. The target was a secret Soviet research and development facility located at Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan. The Semipalatinsk site was a high-priority intelligence target. It was known to be involved in the development and testing of advanced weapons systems. Price was tasked with describing the facility. He was given only the geographic map coordinates. The experiment spanned 4 days and produced a complex dataset, a mixture of inaccurate information and one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the program's history. We will review the detailed session report, summarizing the data collected over the 4 days. On day 1, Price correctly identified the general nature of the site as a military research area. His initial perception included a key feature, a gantry crane for heavy lifting. This was a significant data point, as the presence of such a crane would indicate the scale and nature of the activities at the facility. However, his description of the building layout on the first day was largely incorrect. That evening, his handlers, recognizing the potential significance of the crane observation, instructed him by phone to focus specifically on the crane during the next day's session. On day 2, Price produced his most significant data. He focused his attention on the crane and described its immense size. He noted that it was a riding gantry, meaning it was mobile. He specified that it moved on very heavy, looks like railroad track. He then produced a detailed sketch of the crane, illustrating its structure and configuration. The accuracy of this sketch is the central element of the Semipalatinsk case. A declassified analysis of this drawing, written by a CIA analyst tasked with evaluating the remote viewing program, contains a remarkable assessment of Price's performance. The analyst wrote, "On the second day, Price supplied the most positive evidence yet for the remote viewing experiment with his sketch of the rail-mounted gantry crane. It seems inconceivable to imagine how he could have drawn such a likeness to the actual crane unless he actually saw it through remote viewing, or he was informed of what to draw by someone knowledgeable of it." The analyst essentially concluded that the accuracy of the drawing was so high that it could only be explained by either successful remote viewing or a security leak. Given the stringent protocols under which the session was conducted, the latter possibility was considered highly unlikely. However, the session was not uniformly accurate. On days 3 and 4, Price's accuracy degraded significantly. When shown a sketch of the actual site layout derived from satellite imagery, he misinterpreted the structures. He perceived a large underground building as 4 separate above-ground structures. He also incorrectly stated, "There is nothing subterranean right in that particular area," when in fact significant portions of the facility were underground. The analysis and confirmation of the Semipalatinsk session perfectly encapsulate the challenge of remote viewing as an intelligence tool. Price's drawing of the gantry crane was later confirmed to be remarkably accurate by subsequent satellite imagery. The existence and configuration of the massive crane were verified. This represented an extraordinary hit, providing valuable intelligence on the capabilities of the Soviet facility. Yet, this highly accurate data point was embedded within a larger body of information that was inconsistent and erroneous. The CIA analyst's own report highlights this dilemma. The analyst struggled to reconcile the stunning accuracy of the crane, drawing with the clear inaccuracies of the other descriptions provided by Price. This mixture of signal and noise is characteristic of the remote viewing process. The challenge for the intelligence community was determining how to utilize the accurate information while filtering out the erroneous data. The Semipalatinsk session demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of remote viewing as an operational tool. Chapter 6: Spies of the Mind. As the program became established at Fort Meade, the focus shifted increasingly towards operational targets. The remote viewing unit was tasked with providing intelligence on a wide range of activities, particularly those related to the Soviet Union's military capabilities. The Cold War provided a constant stream of targets, from new weapons systems to covert operations. Two areas of particular interest were Soviet aircraft and submarines. The ability to detect and track these assets was a top priority for U.S. intelligence, and the remote viewing unit was seen as a potential tool to supplement conventional surveillance methods. One such target involved a new type of Soviet aircraft. In a session dated May 6, 1980, a remote viewer was tasked with locating and describing a downed aircraft. While the declassified transcript identifies the viewer only as number 19.5, other sources credit Joe McMoneagle with locating a downed Soviet bomber during this period. The transcript provides a window into the raw, unfiltered nature of an operational session. The viewer is attempting to acquire information about a specific target under time pressure, guided by the questions of the monitor. Let us review the verbatim transcript of the session, designated RV session CC-96. Monitor, focus your attention on the aircraft as it is lying right now. Viewer 19.5. My most immediate impression is that it's not a brand new aircraft, with square intakes adjacent to the cockpit. I am also left with an impression that it's upside down, missing one of the wings. Also, left with impression that the importance of the aircraft is what it was carrying. It's got some kind of new rocket it's carrying. Air-to-air type rocket. The viewer begins by providing concrete visual data, such as the square intakes and the missing wing, suggesting a specific type of aircraft configuration. The impression that the aircraft was upside down indicated its condition as a crash site. The focus on the payload, the new rocket, highlighted the intelligence value of the target. The viewer then continued, attempting to identify the personnel involved and the location of the crash. Viewer 19.5. I don't see Soviet markings on this aircraft, but I sense that it was manned by a Soviet pilot, and had I think Arabic navigator or observer, it was flying a very low-level border-type mission. When I pull back for altitude to get a ground layout, I get an impression that I am looking at the coast of Turkey. The perception of a mixed crew, a Soviet pilot and an Arabic navigator, suggested a specific type of military cooperation. The location on the coast of Turkey provided a geographic constraint for the search effort. The viewer then attempted to describe the insignia on the aircraft. Viewer 19.5. I'll do a better shot of the insignia on the aircraft. Looking straight on at the insignia, I get this impression, and it's a magenta color, like a deep purple color. The viewer concluded the session with a reflection on the difficulty of the task. Viewer 19.5. I also would like to say that it is very difficult to locate the aircraft because we don't know what kind it is, and there is a lot of aircraft there. This is the newest one that I could come up with. This transcript illustrates the raw, unfiltered nature of an operational session. The viewer provided a mix of sensory data, intuitive impressions, and analytical overlay. The viewer's own commentary about the difficulty of the task highlights the challenge of separating a clear psychic signal from mental noise. The challenge for the intelligence analyst was to separate the accurate information from the noise and to integrate the remote viewing data with other intelligence sources. Another significant operational deployment involved the identification of Soviet submarines. Locating and identifying new classes of Soviet nuclear submarines was a top priority for U.S. intelligence during the Cold War. In September 1979, the National Security Council reportedly tasked the remote viewing unit to gather information on a new Soviet submarine under construction. A remote viewer described the submarine in detail. A very large, new submarine with 18 to 20 missile launch tubes and a large flat area at the aft end would be launched in 100 days. This description closely matches the specifications of the massive Soviet project. 941, known to NATO as the Typhoon class, the largest submarines ever built. The Typhoon class featured a distinctive design with a large flat area at the aft end and carried 20 ballistic missiles. The prediction of the launch date, within 100 days, provided a specific time frame for verification. Joe McMoneagle is also specifically credited with identifying this new class of submarine, known to the Soviets as Akula, which means shark in English. As with many operational sessions, the full verbatim transcripts of these submarine viewings are not available in the public record. However, the anecdotal accounts and the declassified summaries suggest that remote viewing provided valuable intelligence on critical strategic targets. Beyond research and calibration, the remote viewing unit at Fort Meade was tasked with providing intelligence on active crises. These operational deployments tested the limits of the phenomenon, demanding timely and accurate information in high-stakes situations. The results of these deployments highlight the central conflict of the program, the production of seemingly accurate data versus its utility as actionable intelligence. One of the most well-documented crisis responses involved the kidnapping of U.S. Army Brigadier General James L. Dozier. In December 1981, General Dozier was kidnapped in Verona, Italy, by Red Brigade's terrorists. The kidnapping triggered a massive international manhunt. The remote viewing unit at Fort Meade was tasked to help locate General Dozier. The unit conducted numerous sessions, attempting to identify the location of the hostage and the movements of the kidnappers. A declassified briefing memo states that a drawing from a session on the 18th of December 1981 was used by an analyst from the Defense Intelligence Agency to brief commanders that the search for General Dozier should be, quote, concentrated in the Padua area, end quote. This briefing occurred several weeks before Italian forces eventually rescued Dozier from an apartment in Padua on the 28th of January, 1982. The viewer's data appeared to have correctly identified the city where the hostage was being held. A later session transcript from the 20th of January, 1982, just 8 days before the rescue, shows the viewer identified as number 06, describing a location near a lake and mountains before stating, "I get an old name, Padua. Very old, 300 years. I don't know why I got that." The explicit naming of Padua in this session is a significant intelligence hit. However, the Dozier case also illustrates the immense institutional barriers that prevented the effective utilization of remote viewing data. The same briefing memo reveals that the drawing from the 20th of January session, which explicitly named Padua, was not forwarded to Italian authorities. The reason given for withholding this information highlights the skepticism and resistance that the program faced. The memo states that the Italian police were reluctant to act on any future psychic information. After several unsuccessful operations, based on tips from other non-affiliated psychics, proved rather embarrassing. This demonstrates the critical distinction between the production of accurate data and its acceptance and use by conventional intelligence and law enforcement agencies. The remote viewing unit produced the correct city name, a potentially crucial piece of intelligence. However, the stigma associated with psychic phenomena and the lack of trust in the methodology prevented this information from being acted upon. The Dozier case is therefore a prime example of the program's perceived successes and practical failures. It demonstrated the potential of remote viewing to provide valuable intelligence in a crisis situation. Yet, it also highlighted the limitations imposed by institutional skepticism and the difficulty of translating anomalous data into actionable intelligence. Other crisis responses included the Iran hostage crisis, 1979 to 1981. The remote viewing unit, then operating under the codename Grill Flame, was reportedly tasked on the crisis. The 444-day crisis involving American hostages held at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was a major focus of the U.S. intelligence community. The remote viewing unit was reportedly tasked on the crisis, with Joe McMoneagle claiming to have viewed the situation. However, no verbatim session transcripts related to the hostage crisis have been declassified. The lack of specific documented successes or failures suggests that either the viewings produced no valuable intelligence or that the records remain classified. The operational deployments of the remote viewing unit demonstrated that the phenomenon could produce accurate information in real-world situations. However, the utility of this information was often constrained by its inherent ambiguity and the institutional resistance of the intelligence community. Chapter 7: A Million-Year Echo from Mars. Among the thousands of declassified documents in the Stargate archives, one session stands out as particularly unusual and intriguing. It occurred on May 22, 1984. A remote viewer was tasked with perceiving a set of coordinates on the planet Mars. Furthermore, the tasking specified a point in time approximately 1 million years in the past. The target location corresponds to the Cydonia region of Mars, an area that had gained public attention due to images taken by the Viking 1 orbiter in 1976, which appeared to show unusual geological features. The nature of this target, being completely unverifiable and outside the scope of any existing human knowledge, suggests a potential methodological purpose. It may have served as a unique form of calibration test. By tasking the viewer with a target that was entirely unknown, the researchers could evaluate the remote viewing signal line itself, free from any possibility of sensory leakage, analytical contamination, or prior knowledge on the part of the viewer, the monitor, or the program management. It was an exploration of the limits of the phenomenon. We will now review the verbatim transcript of this session, titled Mars Exploration, May 22, 1984. The transcript details the interaction between the monitor and the subject. The session begins with the monitor outlining the protocol. The method of site acquisition for this session is a sealed envelope coupled with geographic coordinates. The envelope will be given to the subject immediately prior to the interview. The envelope is not to be opened until after the interview. The sealed envelope contained information specifying the target location and the target time. The monitor then provided the first set of coordinates. Monitor plus 10 minutes. All right, using the information in the envelope I've provided, move to the location indicated by the geographic coordinates that I will give you. 40.89 degrees north, 9.55 degrees west. The subject begins to describe their perceptions. I want to say it looks like, I don't know, it sort of looks. I kind of got an oblique view of a pyramid or pyramid form. It is very high. It is kind of sitting in a large depressed area. It is yellowish, ochre colored. The monitor then instructs the subject to move to the specified time period. Monitor instructs subject to move to the time indicated in the envelope, approx. 1 million years BC. The subject describes the environment at this distant time. I am tracking severe clouds. More like dust storm. It is a geologic problem. I am looking at a after effect of a major geologic problem. The monitor then attempts to focus the viewer on the period before this geologic event. Monitor OK. Go back to the time before the geologic problem. The subject describes the landscape before the event. Total difference. It is before there is no oh hell. It is like mountains of dirt, appear and then disappear when you go before. See large flat surfaces, very smooth. Angles, walls. They're really large though. I mean, they're megalithic. The description of megalithic structures with smooth angles, walls suggests artificial constructions on a massive scale. The subject then perceives inhabitants. Subject. I just keep seeing very large people. They appear thin and tall, but they're very large. Wearing some kind of strange clothes. The narrative begins to take shape, moving from the description of the physical environment to the perception of intelligent life. We continue our examination of the Mars exploration session transcript from May 22, 1984. The remote viewer has described massive structures and tall, thin inhabitants on the Martian surface approximately 1 million years ago. The monitor proceeds by providing a new set of coordinates. Monitor, move now to 46.45 north, 353.22 east. The subject moves to the new location, deep inside of a cavern, not a cavern, more like canyon. It is like the wall of the canyon itself has been carved. Again, I am getting a very large structures, no intricacies. Huge sections of smooth stone. Yes, it is like a rabbit warren, corners of rooms, they're really huge. The perception is of an interior space, possibly underground or carved into the landscape. Again, characterized by large scale and smooth surfaces. The monitor then directs the viewer to another location on the planet. Monitor, another movement now to 80 degrees south, 64 degrees east. The subject describes the new site. See pyramids. Can't tell if it is overlay or not because they're different. Got both insides and outsides, and they're huge, different chambers. But they're almost stripped of any kind of furnishings or anything. It is like a strictly functional place for sleeping or hibernation, some form, sleeping through storms. The recurring theme of pyramid structures is notable. The viewer interprets their function as shelters for hibernation, a response to the environmental instability previously described. The monitor then focuses on the inhabitants. Monitor, tell me about the ones who sleep through the storms. Subject. Very tall again, very large people, but they're thin. The monitor instructs the viewer to interact with one of these beings. Monitor, move close to one of them and ask them to tell you about themselves. The subject reports the communication. They're ancient people. They're dying. It is past their time or age. They're very philosophic about it. They're looking for a way to survive and they just can't. There evidently was a group or a party of them that went to find a new place to live. It is like I am getting all kinds of overwhelming input of the corruption of their environment. It is failing very rapidly. The narrative emerging from the session is coherent and detailed. An ancient civilization facing an existential crisis due to environmental collapse. The monitor probes further into the departure of this group. When the others left, these people are waiting. When the others left, how did they go? The subject describes the means of transport. Get an impression of awe. Don't know what the hell it is. It looks like the inside of a larger boat. Very rounded walls and shiny metal. The analysis of the Mars exploration session presents unique challenges. The data is extraordinary, yet the target is completely unverifiable, making it impossible to assess the accuracy of the perceptions. The session can be interpreted in several ways. It may represent a genuine perception of a distant past, suggesting that remote viewing is not limited by time. Regardless of the interpretation, the Cydonia session provides a fascinating glimpse into the potential scope of remote viewing and the complexities of the human mind. It stands as a calibration anomaly, a data point that challenges the boundaries of conventional understanding and highlights the profound mysteries of consciousness. It remains one of the most unusual documents in the Stargate archive. Chapter 8: Non-Locality and the Impossible Physics. The program's lead physicists, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, did not view remote viewing as a supernatural or mystical event. They were trained in the rigorous traditions of the physical sciences and sought potential explanations for the phenomenon within the more paradoxical and non-intuitive frameworks of modern physics, particularly quantum mechanics. Their writings and papers suggest they were searching for a physical theory that could account for the apparent transfer of information without the use of known sensory channels. The central challenge posed by remote viewing is the problem of non-locality. How can an individual perceive a distant location instantaneously, seemingly independent of the constraints of space and time? Classical physics offers no mechanism for such a phenomenon. However, quantum mechanics introduces concepts that challenge the classical understanding of reality. One of the most profound concepts is quantum entanglement, where two or more particles become linked in such a way that their fates are intertwined, regardless of the distance separating them. If the state of one particle is measured, the state of the other particle is instantaneously determined. Albert Einstein famously referred to this phenomenon as spooky action at a distance. In their 1977 book, Mind Reach, and other publications, Puthoff and Targ explored the potential connection between quantum non-locality and remote viewing. They suggested that the non-common sense features accepted in quantum physics may be analogous to the non-common sense features observed in parapsychological phenomena. They hypothesized that consciousness itself might possess non-local properties, allowing it to access information directly without the mediation of sensory input. A review of their early papers noted that Puthoff's speculations on psychokinesis were consistent with phenomena observed at the microscopic quantum level. The idea was that the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics might provide a window for the mind to influence physical systems. In his later work, The Reality of ESP, Russell Targ explicitly connected remote viewing to the concept of non-locality. He proposed that these abilities could be understood through a Buddhist and Hindu view of ourselves as non-local eternal awareness, suggesting that consciousness is not confined to a specific point in space or time. He argued that the apparent separation between individuals and their environment is an illusion created by the limitations of ordinary perception. Hal Puthoff has also explored theoretical frameworks that might accommodate the phenomenon. He has published papers on zero-point energy, the energy inherent in the vacuum of space, as a potential medium for the transmission of information. Puthoff hypothesized that this ubiquitous background energy field might serve as a substrate for non-local interactions, while no definitive theory was ever established. The work of Puthoff and Targ represented a serious attempt to bridge the gap between anomalous human experience and fundamental physics. They sought to move the discussion of psychic phenomena from the realm of superstition to the domain of scientific inquiry, exploring the implications of modern physics for the understanding of consciousness. The physics of non-locality, while still poorly understood, offers a potential framework for exploring the profound mysteries of the human mind and its relationship to the universe. Chapter 9. Declassified. For over 20 years, the remote viewing program operated in the shadows, sustained by a combination of intriguing results, high-level patronage, and the persistent fear of a Soviet psychic threat. By 1995, the geopolitical landscape had shifted dramatically. The Cold War was over, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and the primary justification for the program had evaporated. In this new environment, the program faced a final public evaluation. In 1995, Congress directed the CIA to take control of the Stargate program and commissioned an independent retrospective evaluation of its effectiveness. The contract was awarded to the American Institutes for Research, or AIR. The resulting report, authored primarily by statistician Jessica Utis and skeptical psychologist Ray Hyman, served as the program's official postmortem. Its conclusions were nuanced and ultimately fatal to the project. The report was tasked with assessing both the scientific validity of the remote viewing phenomenon and its utility for intelligence gathering. The report's findings were presented in two parts: an assessment of the laboratory research and an evaluation of the operational applications. The assessment of the laboratory research reached a notable conclusion. It acknowledged that the viewers in controlled experiments performed better than chance, demonstrating a statistically significant effect. The statistical evidence suggested that the phenomenon was real, at least under laboratory conditions. However, the evaluation of the operational applications came to a starkly different conclusion. It found that the remote viewing data was often vague, ambiguous, and unreliable. It concluded that the phenomenon had never produced actionable intelligence, information of sufficient quality and accuracy to inform decision-making. The report's central finding was the critical distinction between laboratory results and operational utility. It acknowledged the existence of a statistically significant effect in the laboratory, but concluded that this effect was too small and inconsistent to be of practical value to the intelligence community. The verbatim text of the report's conclusions summarizes this assessment. The foregoing observations provide a compelling argument against continuation of the program within the intelligence community. Even though a statistically significant effect has been observed in the laboratory, it remains unclear whether the existence of a paranormal phenomenon, remote viewing, has been demonstrated. The laboratory studies do not provide evidence regarding the origins or nature of the phenomenon, assuming it exists, nor do they address the important methodological issue of interjudge reliability. The report continued, emphasizing the limitations of the phenomenon for intelligence gathering. Further, even if it could be demonstrated unequivocally that a paranormal phenomenon occurs under the conditions present in the laboratory paradigm, these conditions have limited applicability and utility for intelligence gathering operations. For example, the nature of the remote viewing targets are vastly dissimilar, as are the specific tasks required of the remote viewers. Most importantly, the information provided by remote viewing is vague and ambiguous, making it difficult, if not impossible, for the technique to yield information of sufficient quality and accuracy of information for actionable intelligence. Thus, we conclude that continued use of remote viewing in intelligence gathering operations is not warranted. Based on this assessment, the CIA terminated the Stargate project and declassified its existence. The official verdict was clear: remote viewing, while scientifically intriguing, was operationally useless. The 2-decade-long experiment in psychic espionage had come to an end. The termination of the Stargate program and the release of the report sparked a vigorous debate regarding the validity of the evaluation and the legacy of the program. The program's principal scientists argued that the report's conclusions were predetermined and that the evaluation methodology was designed to justify the program's termination. They presented compelling evidence that challenged the official verdict. Dr. Edwin May, the program's director of research at the time, was the most vocal critic of the report. He contended that the CIA's conclusions were set before the investigation even began. In a paper reviewing the error assessment, he wrote, "It will be shown that there is compelling evidence that the CIA set the outcome with regard to intelligence usage before the evaluation had begun." This was accomplished by limiting the research and operations data sets to exclude positive findings, by purposefully not interviewing historically significant participants, by ignoring previous extensive Department of Defense program reviews, and by using the questionable National Research Council's investigation. May argued that the CIA purposefully examined only a small fraction of the operational database, focusing on a period known to be problematic, thereby ignoring the program's most significant successes. He concluded that political and administrative considerations, not a fair scientific evaluation, drove the decision to end the program. Perhaps the most compelling counter-argument came from within the evaluation panel itself. Dr. Jessica Utees, the statistician responsible for reviewing the laboratory data, came to a starkly different conclusion than the report's official summary. While the report's overall conclusion emphasized the lack of operational utility, her independent assessment focused on the strength of the scientific evidence. In her independent assessment, she wrote, "Using the standards applied to any other area of science, it is concluded that psychic functioning has been well established. The statistical results of the studies examined are far beyond what is expected by chance. Arguments that these results could be due to methodological flaws in the experiments are soundly refuted. Effects of similar magnitude to those found in government-sponsored research have been replicated at a number of laboratories across the world. Such consistency cannot be readily explained by claims of flaws or fraud. This divergence reveals the deep fissure at the heart of the debate." The program's own evaluator, when analyzing the data purely from a scientific and statistical standpoint, found the evidence for the phenomenon to be compelling. She concluded that the existence of psychic functioning had been established by the rigorous standards of modern science. However, the report's final policy-driven conclusion, authored by the other evaluator and adopted by the CIA, focused solely on the lack of operational utility. The CIA's decision to terminate the program was based on the assessment that remote viewing, while real, was not useful for intelligence gathering. This distinction is crucial for understanding the legacy of the Stargate program. The program did not end because the phenomenon was disproven. In fact, the official evaluation confirmed the existence of a statistically significant effect. The program ended because the phenomenon was deemed unusable in the context of conventional intelligence operations. The Stargate program remains a unique and controversial chapter in the history of American intelligence. It represents a sustained, government-sponsored investigation into the fringes of human consciousness. Driven by the pressures of the Cold War and conducted by a dedicated group of scientists and viewers, the program's legacy is complex. It produced a vast archive of data that continues to be analyzed and debated. It developed rigorous methodologies for the investigation of psychic phenomena, establishing the field of remote viewing as a distinct area of study, and it raised profound questions about the nature of consciousness, the limits of human perception, and the relationship between the mind and the physical world. The final verdict on the Stargate program remains strange. While the official conclusion emphasized its operational failures, the scientific findings suggest that the story is far from over. The mysteries of the human mind explored in those quiet rooms continue to beckon, inviting further investigation and challenging the boundaries of the known. Chapter 10. What else do we know? The official termination of Project Stargate in 1995 marked the end of a specific government-sponsored chapter in the study of remote viewing, but it was far from the final word, although the closure of the program did not end the inquiry into non-local consciousness. The findings of the program and the statistically significant validation of the phenomenon under laboratory conditions posed questions too profound to be abandoned, simply because the intelligence community found the data difficult to utilize. The Soviets often publicly denounced psychic research as pseudoscience, while simultaneously funding highly classified programs. It remains entirely plausible that the United States government adopted a similar strategy, officially closing the public-facing program, while potentially continuing the research in deeper secrecy, buried within special access programs, far from the reach of congressional oversight. Regardless of the status of classified programs, the immediate aftermath of 1995 saw a significant migration of talent. The scientists and viewers who had dedicated years, sometimes decades, to this research transitioned into the private sector, forming a diaspora that would carry the inquiry forward, liberated from the constraints of government secrecy and military objectives. The principal scientists continued their inquiries, each following a different thread of the mystery. Dr. Harold Puthoff, the physicist who co-founded the original research at the Stanford Research Institute, continued his work on the theoretical frontiers of physics. He established the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin, and later Earth Tech International. These organizations explored the fundamental physics that might explain how anomalous perception occurs, focusing on concepts such as zero-point energy, the energy inherent in the vacuum of space, and the structure of the quantum vacuum. Puthoff remained dedicated to finding the physical mechanisms that allow consciousness to interact non-locally with the universe, seeking a theoretical framework that could integrate these phenomena into our understanding of physical law. Russell Targ took a different path, focusing primarily on public education and the profound spiritual implications of their findings. Through numerous books, documentaries, and workshops, Targ worked tirelessly to demystify remote viewing. He emphasized the connection between the non-local physics suggested by the experiments and the perennial wisdom found in Eastern spiritual traditions, particularly Buddhism. Targ framed remote viewing not as a rare gift or an elite espionage tool, but as an innate human skill, a natural consequence of understanding that consciousness itself is not confined to the physical brain, but is fundamentally interconnected. Dr. Edwin May represents the most direct scientific continuation of the Stargate research agenda. After 1995, he established the Laboratories for Fundamental Research in Palo Alto, California, Seeking to move the field toward greater scientific legitimacy and rigor, Dr. May adopted the term anomalous cognition as a more neutral and descriptive alternative to the culturally loaded term remote viewing. His post-Stargate research focused on the rigorous scientific methodology, identifying the neurophysiological correlates of the phenomenon, what is happening in the brain during a successful session, and developing sophisticated theoretical models based on information theory. Crucially, May also became the historian of the program, undertaking the monumental task of compiling and publishing the program's declassified data in the 4-volume collection, the Stargate Archives, ensuring the data was preserved for future generations. The viewers, the instruments of perception, also emerged from the shadows into the public sphere. They became the teachers, the popularizers, and the custodians of the methodologies developed under government contracts. Joseph McMoneagle, Viewer 001, authored several influential books detailing his extraordinary experiences and continued to work as a consultant and instructor. His transition highlighted the practical applications of remote viewing beyond intelligence gathering, including work in archaeology, missing persons cases, and even financial forecasting. He often collaborated with organizations dedicated to the exploration of consciousness, demonstrating the techniques he honed in the service of national security. Others, like Leonard Buchanan, a former trainer for the Army unit, and Paul H. Smith, who was personally trained by Ingo Swann and was the primary author of the military's official coordinate remote viewing training manual, established formal training programs. One of the most significant consequences of the program's declassification was the rapid emergence of a public market for this training. The classified military studies were translated for a civilian audience. This transition led to the proliferation of various branded methodologies, technical remote viewing, scientific remote viewing, and others, most of which are direct descendants of the original protocol. The core principles remained the same, a structured process designed to bypass the analytical mind and access the raw stream of non-local information. The end of centralized government funding created a vacuum that was filled by a network of private institutions and professional organizations. This civilian ecosystem has actively worked to expand upon it, with new research and standardizing practices. Several key non-governmental organizations have become centers of gravity for the scientific study of consciousness and psychic phenomena, providing an intellectual home for research that lies outside the mainstream academic consensus. The Rhine Research Center represents the longest continuous tradition of such independent research in the United States. It is the modern successor to Dr. J.B. Rhine's pioneering parapsychology laboratory at Duke University, which began its work in the 1930s. The Rhine Center's work both predates and outlasts the Stargate program. After decades of rigorous study, the center's official position is unequivocal. The existence of such phenomena is no longer in question. They maintain that psi is real, repeatable, and observable in controlled scientific experiments. The focus now is on understanding how these phenomena work. Another significant institution is the Institute of Noetic Sciences. It was founded in 1973 by Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell. The institute was inspired by the profound cognitive shift Mitchell experienced while returning from the moon, an overwhelming sense of universal interconnectedness, and the realization that consciousness itself is a fundamental aspect of the universe. The Institute's research agenda focuses on concepts central to remote viewing, including non-local consciousness, mind-matter interaction, and the interconnected nature of reality. In the years immediately following Stargate's declassification, the field was fragmented and lacked centralized organization. To create a central hub for the community, many of the program's key alumni came together to form a central professional body. The International Remote Viewing Association was established on the 18th of March 1999. Its founding members included Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, and several of the key military viewers. It now serves as the primary community hub for the field. It hosts regular international conferences, bringing together researchers, practitioners, and students to present new findings and discuss the state of the art. They also publish a journal called Aperture, which serves as a record for the community and works to establish ethical standards for the practice of remote viewing. This infrastructure has allowed the field to mature, moving beyond the constraints of military objectives into a broader exploration of human potential. While the research at SRI, which focused on the rigorous protocol-driven methodology of coordinate remote viewing, it is crucial to understand that the government's interest in consciousness extended beyond this single track. The intelligence community, specifically the Army's Intelligence and Security Command, was also deeply interested in existing civilian methodologies for altering consciousness and accessing non-local information. Central to this parallel track was the Monroe Institute. The Monroe Institute was founded by Robert Monroe, a successful radio broadcasting executive who began having spontaneous, profound out-of-body experiences in the 1950s. Driven by a desire to understand these experiences scientifically, Monroe established the Institute to study the nature of consciousness outside the physical body. Monroe's core technology, developed through years of experimentation, was HemiSync, short for hemispheric synchronization. This proprietary audio system utilizes a phenomenon known as binaural beats. The technique works by presenting two slightly different audio frequencies to each ear. For example, if 200 Hz is played in the left ear and 210 Hz in the right ear, the brain, attempting to reconcile this difference, perceives a third phantom beat at the differential frequency, in this case 10 Hz. This frequency, which corresponds to the alpha or theta brainwave states associated with deep relaxation and meditation, was intended to synchronize the electrical activity of the brain's left and right hemispheres. Monroe theorized that this coherent brain state, achieved through a structured training program he called the Gateway Experience, facilitated access to expanded states of awareness, including the out-of-body state, the perception of non-physical realities, and the ability to access non-local information. The connection between the Monroe Institute and the Stargate program was direct and significant. The Army's remote viewing unit at Fort Meade actively participated in the Gateway program. Key figures, including Joe McMoneagle and the unit's operations officer, Skip Atwater, trained extensively at the Institute. The objective was intensely practical. The mental state induced by HemiSync appeared very similar to the state required for successful remote viewing. The Army wanted to determine if these auditory technologies could bypass the conscious mind's analytical filters, what Ingo Swann called analytical overlay, and make the viewer's access to non-local information more reliable and consistent. This collaboration is detailed in a remarkable document, declassified by the CIA in 2003. The 1983 report titled Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process was authored by U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonnell. The report was a rigorous attempt to understand the mechanics of the gateway experience and to remove the occult stigma from the phenomenon by framing it within the language of theoretical physics, neuroscience, and quantum mechanics. McDonnell's assessment proposed a radical model of reality. Drawing on the work of physicists like David Bohm, he hypothesized that the universe is a universal hologram, a vast, interconnected energy field where every part contains information about the whole. Consciousness, in this model, is not confined to the brain, but is a vibrational energy pattern that interacts with this holographic field. The report theorized that the coherent state induced by HemiSync could allow human consciousness to alter its own energy pattern, resonate with the universe's fundamental structure, and thus transcend the limitations of space and time. McDonnell wrote, "The Gateway Experience is a training system designed to bring enhanced strength, focus, and coherence to the amplitude and frequency of brainwave output between the left and right hemispheres, so as to alter consciousness, moving it outside the physical sphere, so as to ultimately escape even the restrictions of time and space." The implications of the Gateway assessment are profound. It concluded that the Monroe techniques were plausible and had significant operational potential. It underscores that the government's interest extended far beyond mere psychic espionage. They were investigating the fundamental mechanics of consciousness itself and exploring the possibility that reality is structured in a way that is radically different from the conventional materialistic worldview. The Gateway document remains one of the most sophisticated theoretical frameworks ever produced within the classified world for understanding the nature of non-local perception. The American Stargate program and the parallel research at the Monroe Institute existed within a global context of interest and paranoia. Regarding the potential of psychic abilities for espionage and warfare, the Cold War psychic gap was a reflection of genuine, albeit secretive, efforts by other world powers to explore the same phenomena in the Soviet Union and subsequently Russia. The research into psychotronics was extensive and deeply integrated into their military and scientific establishments. As we established, the primary motivation for the US program was the fear of a Soviet breakthrough. While the USSR engaged in a sophisticated campaign of public denial and disinformation, their state-sponsored research was a high priority. According to Dr. Edwin May, the Russian program was significantly larger than the American effort, reportedly integrating over 120 trained viewers into their military intelligence apparatus. However, due to Russia's continued classification of these programs, detailed specifics remain scarce, and the current status of their research is largely unknown. Other nations also conducted their own investigations, often motivated by the findings of the American program or their own internal strategic assessments. In the United Kingdom, documents declassified in 2002 revealed that the Ministry of Defense had conducted its own small-scale study of remote viewing. The timing suggests a possible motivation was to determine if psychic abilities could be used in the War on Terror, for example, to locate high-value targets like Osama bin Laden. The methodology involved amateur psychics attempting to identify images concealed within opaque envelopes. The viewers achieved a modest accuracy rate of 28%. Mirroring the conclusion of the American program, the Ministry of Defense deemed this result insufficient for operational use and terminated the research, concluding it would not be helpful in the defense of the UK. China also experienced a significant wave of interest in this field, beginning in the late 1970s. This was known as Extraordinary Human Body Function, EABF, or Human Paranormal Capabilities. The movement was sparked by widespread reports of psychic children demonstrating abilities such as clairvoyance and psychokinesis. The research was not marginalized. It was championed by top-tier scientists, including Qian Shusen, known as the father of the Chinese missile. He framed it as a new scientific revolution linked to traditional Chinese concepts like Qigong. While the field faced periodic political crackdowns from Communist Party hardliners, who denounced it as superstition or pseudoscience, research has reportedly continued, with some sources suggesting the People's Liberation Army has conducted its own experiments in psychic warfare. The global interest underscores that the questions raised by Stargate are universal, transcending cultural and political boundaries. The potential strategic advantage offered by non-local perception remains a compelling, if elusive, goal for intelligence agencies worldwide. While the official, publicly acknowledged U.S. government research into psychic phenomena ended in 1995, the strategic objectives that motivated it did not disappear. The desire for advanced perception and communication remains a high priority for military and intelligence operations. Instead of abandoning these goals, they appear to have been absorbed and reframed within the domain of advanced technology. The quest for psychic abilities evolved into the race for technological telepathy and enhanced intuition. The core goals of Stargate were acquiring information inaccessible to conventional sensors, clairvoyance, or remote viewing, and enabling covert communication like telepathy. The biological or psychic approach, while statistically significant, proved inconsistent, difficult to control, and subject to institutional stigma. A technological solution based on neuroscience and engineering offers the promise of a more reliable, replicable, and scientifically palatable means to achieve the same strategic ends. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, the agency responsible for developing breakthrough technologies for national security, has funded a series of ambitious programs aimed at creating direct brain-to-brain or brain-to-computer communication links. The Silent Talk program, initiated in the late 2000s, sought to develop a system that could analyze the neural signals associated with pre-speech, the words one formulates mentally before speaking. Using electroencephalography, the goal was to transmit these signals to another user on the battlefield, enabling silent communication, a form of synthetic telepathy. The Next Generation Non-Surgical Neurotechnology, or N3 program, represents a more recent and sophisticated effort. Its goal is to develop high-performance, bidirectional, and non-invasive brain-computer interfaces for soldiers. The explicit purpose is to allow personnel to command complex systems, such as drone swarms or active cyber defenses, at speeds that exceed the limits of conventional human reaction time. This is essentially technologically augmented intuition and thought. Controlled warfare. The Moana project, standing for Magnetic Optical and Acoustic Neural Access, aims to create a wireless headset capable of using light to read neural activity in one person's brain and magnetic fields, and then write that same information into another person's brain. That's direct, brain-to-brain communication. This sustained investment demonstrates that the government did not abandon the strategic desire for abilities analogous to telepathy and clairvoyance. It shifted its methodology from the paranormal to the neurotechnological. It is interesting to note a recent and unrelated use of the same codename. In 2025, a massive, multi-hundred billion dollar initiative was announced involving the US government and major technology companies, also named Project Stargate. This new project has no connection to the psychic espionage program. Its purpose is to build the vast infrastructure of data centers and energy grids required to support the development of next-generation artificial intelligence, particularly artificial general intelligence. The reuse of the name may allude to another government-backed moonshot into a transformative and poorly understood frontier, this time digging into the promises of artificial intelligence. The findings of the Stargate program, which scientifically demonstrated the existence of a human capacity to access information non-locally, do not exist in a vacuum. While framed in the language of modern science and statistics, the phenomenon itself is not new. It represents a modern, systematic rediscovery of an ability that has been documented, practiced, and integrated into cultural and spiritual frameworks for millennia. To fully grasp the implications of Stargate, one must look beyond the laboratory and into the deeper history of human consciousness. Shamanism, a set of practices found in indigenous cultures worldwide and dating back to at least the Paleolithic era, offers a powerful historical analog to remote viewing. The core of shamanic practice is the ability of the shaman to voluntarily enter an altered state of consciousness in order to journey into what are often described as spirit worlds or non-ordinary realities. The purpose of this journey is to retrieve information, diagnose the spiritual causes of illness, perform healing, or engage in divination for the benefit of the community. While the cultural contexts are vastly different, the underlying methodologies and experiences show striking parallels, where the remote viewer uses a structured, secular protocol, like coordinate remote viewing, to quiet the analytical mind and become receptive to subtle impressions. The shaman uses techniques such as monotonous drumming, rattling, chanting, fasting, or, in some cultures, the use of entheogenic plants to induce the altered state. Both methods serve the same fundamental purpose: to shift consciousness from its ordinary, ego-bound state to one capable of non-local perception. The experience of both the remote viewer and the shaman involves the reception of information through a cascade of sensory impressions, fragmentary images, sounds, physical sensations, smells, and emotions. The shamanic journey is often described as soul flight or bilocation, in which the shaman's consciousness is perceived to leave the physical body and travel to the target location. This directly mirrors the subjective experience of many remote viewers and the older occult term for the phenomenon, traveling clairvoyance. Furthermore, shamanism is rooted in a worldview that perceives the cosmos as a multi-layered reality where everything is connected in a web of energy or life, and the unseen spiritual realm directly affects the visible, material world. This ancient, holistic cosmology is a philosophical parallel to the non-local holographic universe, hypothesized by physicists like Puthoff and Targ, and described in the Army's Gateway Assessment. The spiritual traditions of the East, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism, provide another profound context for understanding remote viewing. In these systems, siddhis are extraordinary or paranormal powers that are said to arise as a natural byproduct of advanced stages of meditation and yogic discipline. These ancient texts explicitly describe abilities that are functionally identical to remote viewing and other psi phenomena. Among the many siddhis listed, one is Dita Dharanam, the siddhi of seeing things far away, a direct Sanskrit equivalent of remote viewing. Another is Diti Ravabha, the siddhi of hearing things far away, or clairaudience. However, these traditions offer a crucial element of wisdom that is entirely absent from the Western intelligence-gathering approach, and that could be a profound spiritual warning worth considering. Texts such as the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and numerous Buddhist teachings caution that while the siddhis are real and attainable, they are also significant spiritual traps. An attachment to these powers, or using them to bolster the ego or for material gain, is seen as a major obstacle to the ultimate goal of spiritual practice, which is liberation or nirvana or moksha, and the realization of one's true nature. This provides a vital philosophical counterpoint to the purely utilitarian and results-oriented objectives of the Stargate program. The convergence of evidence from these disparate fields, classified military research, cross-cultural anthropology, and ancient spiritual traditions, is profoundly significant. Each stream of inquiry, using its own language and methodology, points to the same conclusion: the ability of human consciousness to access information independent of the known senses, and the conventional constraints of space and time is a real, demonstrable, and innate human potential. The Stargate program rediscovered a fundamental human capacity that has been known, practiced, and systematized by other cultures for millennia. Stargate attempted to provide a modern, data-driven, scientific validation. Shamanism provides the deep anthropological and historical evidence, suggesting this is not an anomaly but an ancient and integral part of the human experience. The yogic traditions provide a sophisticated psycho-spiritual framework for understanding the cultivation of these abilities and their proper ethical and spiritual context. This convergence implies that the findings of Stargate are only one scientific entry point into a much larger and more profound understanding of consciousness and its place in the universe. They challenge the purely materialistic assumptions of mainstream science and suggest that the potential of the human mind is far greater and far stranger than is commonly understood. Final chapter: the implications of a non-local mind. All right, my friend, we have traveled a long way tonight. We began with the geopolitical anxieties of the Cold War, the fear of a psychic gap that spurred the United States government to launch one of the most unconventional research programs in its history. We traced the bureaucratic odyssey of the Stargate program, from its inception at the Stanford Research Institute to its operational deployment at Fort Meade. We met the scientists who risked their reputations to apply the scientific method to the study of the impossible, and the viewers, the instruments of perception, who demonstrated an astonishing ability to transcend the limits of space and time. We examined the rigorous protocols developed to ensure the validity of the data, and we reviewed the extraordinary results of sessions that targeted distant planets, secret Soviet facilities, and even the ancient past of Mars. And we witnessed the program's controversial end officially terminated due to a lack of operational utility, yet scientifically validated by its own internal review. But what does it all mean? If we accept the data, and the statistical evidence is compelling, we are faced with a reality that is far stranger and more profound than the conventional worldview allows. The implications of the Stargate program extend far beyond the narrow confines of intelligence gathering. They challenge the very foundations of our understanding of reality, the nature of the self, and the future of our species. The central revelation of Stargate is that consciousness is non-local. The human mind is not confined to the physical brain. It is not bound by the constraints of space and time. It possesses the ability to access information directly, instantaneously, regardless of distance or shielding. This single fact shatters the materialistic paradigm that has dominated Western science for centuries. The prevailing assumption is that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, a byproduct of complex neural activity. If this were true, remote viewing would be impossible. The mind could not perceive a location thousands of miles away, or an event that occurred in the past, or one that has yet to happen. The data from Stargate, the Monroe Institute, and centuries of cross-cultural evidence suggests that the materialistic model is incomplete, perhaps fundamentally flawed. It suggests that consciousness is not emergent from matter, but may be fundamental to the universe itself. It implies that the mind is not a localized phenomenon, but a field of awareness that extends beyond the physical body. If consciousness is non-local, then our understanding of the physical universe must also be revised. The theoretical frameworks explored by the program's physicists are not metaphors: quantum entanglement, zero-point energy, the holographic universe model described in the Gateway Assessment. They are all attempts to describe a reality in which everything is interconnected, where information is distributed throughout the cosmos, accessible to the focused attention of the human mind. In a holographic universe, the separation between here and there, between the now and then, those could be illusions created by the limitations of our ordinary perception. What if the remote viewer does not travel to the target location, but access the information that is already present, enfolded within the universal hologram? This suggests that our experience of reality is a construct, a filtered version of a much vaster, interconnected whole. The implications for the nature of the self are equally profound. If our consciousness can perceive any point in space and time, what does that mean for our sense of individuality? Are we truly separate beings, isolated islands of awareness, or are we interconnected nodes in a universal consciousness? The Eastern spiritual traditions have long held that the ego, the sense of a separate self, is an illusion. The data from remote viewing provides empirical support for this ancient wisdom. The ability to access information non-locally suggests that the boundaries of the self are porous, perhaps non-existent at a fundamental level. This realization challenges the very foundation of our social and political structures, which are largely based on the assumption of individuality and separation. If we are fundamentally interconnected, then the conflicts and divisions that characterize human civilization, the wars, the inequalities, the exploitation of the natural world, are all based on a false premise. Furthermore, if consciousness is fundamental and non-local, what does that imply for the mystery of life and death? If the mind is not confined to the brain, does it survive the death of the physical body? The experiences of remote viewers like Joe McMoneagle, whose abilities emerged following a profound near-death experience, suggest that consciousness can exist independently of the physical form. The research into out-of-body experiences, conducted by Robert Monroe, provides further evidence for the continuity of awareness beyond the physical realm. The Stargate program therefore opens the door to a scientific investigation of the most profound questions of human existence. Who are we? Where do we come from? And what happens when we die? The socio-anthropological impact of widespread acceptance and cultivation of these abilities would be transformative. Imagine a world in which remote viewing is a common recognized skill. Privacy, as we currently understand it, would cease to exist. The ability to perceive the thoughts, emotions, and actions of others would render all secrets obsolete. This would necessitate a fundamental reevaluation of our ethical and legal frameworks. Trust would have to be redefined, based not on the assumption of secrecy, but on the reality of transparency. The potential for conflict resolution would be immense. The ability to perceive the perspectives and motivations of others directly, without the distortion of language or ideology, could foster empathy and understanding on an unprecedented scale. It could lead to the resolution of disputes based on mutual understanding rather than the imposition of power. However, the potential for misuse is equally significant. The Stargate program itself was an attempt to weaponize these abilities for the purposes of espionage and warfare. The continuation of this research in the domain of advanced technology, the development of brain-computer interfaces and technological telepathy, it all demonstrates that the desire to control and dominate remains a powerful motivator. The widespread development of these abilities would represent a significant evolutionary leap for our species. It would mark the transition from a civilization based on separation and conflict to one based on interconnection and cooperation. It would be the realization of our full potential as conscious beings. Perhaps the most unsettling implication of the Stargate program is what it reveals about the nature of truth and the control of information. For over 20 years, the United States government conducted rigorous scientific research into a phenomenon that was publicly dismissed as pseudoscience, superstition, or fraud. The program produced compelling evidence for the reality of non-local perception, yet this evidence was suppressed, marginalized, and ultimately ignored by the mainstream scientific community and the media. This raises a critical question. If this profound truth about the nature of human consciousness was hidden in plain sight, ridiculed and dismissed as impossible, what other truths are currently marginalized? What other phenomena, currently labeled as conspiracy theories or paranormal, might also be real? The history of science is replete with examples of phenomena that were initially dismissed as impossible, only to be later accepted as fundamental aspects of reality. The existence of meteorites, the theory of continental drift, the concept of quantum mechanics, all were initially met with skepticism and resistance. The Stargate program forces us to confront the limitations of our current scientific paradigm and the institutional biases that prevent us from exploring the full spectrum of human experience. It demonstrates how the mechanisms of skepticism and ridicule can be used to enforce a narrow, materialistic worldview and to dismiss evidence that challenges the established order. It compels us to reevaluate what we have been taught is true and what we have been led to believe is impossible. It demands that we cultivate a mindset of intellectual humility, open-mindedness, and critical inquiry. So, what now? Where do we go from here? This opens a door into a new reality, a reality in which the human mind is a limitless field of potential. The responsibility for exploring this new frontier rests not with governments or institutions, but with each of us. The path forward requires a synthesis of the scientific rigor of the Stargate program, the experiential wisdom of the shamanic traditions, and the ethical framework of the yogic disciplines. We must continue the scientific investigation of non-local consciousness, refining our methodologies, replicating the findings, and developing theoretical models that can accommodate the data. We must challenge the institutional biases that prevent this research from being integrated into the mainstream scientific discourse. We must also embrace the experiential dimension of this inquiry. Remote viewing is not merely a subject of academic study. It is a skill that can be cultivated through training and practice. The methodologies developed by Ingo Swann, Robert Monroe, and others provide a roadmap for exploring the depths of our own consciousness. However, the most crucial element of this journey is the cultivation of ethical awareness and spiritual maturity. As the yogic traditions warn, the siddhis, the powers of the mind, are potent traps for the ego. The desire to use these abilities for personal gain, control, or domination is a powerful temptation. The choice before us is clear. We can continue to weaponize these abilities, seeking strategic advantage in the endless conflicts of the material world, or we can use them to foster understanding, compassion, and liberation, realizing our true nature as interconnected conscious beings. The final frontier is not outer space, but inner space. The journey is not to distant planets, but to the depths of our own minds. The Stargate program was a tentative step on this journey. It demonstrated that the impossible is possible, that the boundaries of reality are fluid, and that the potential of the human mind is far greater than we have ever imagined. For now, there is nothing more to discuss. It is time to rest. Sleep well.